bill that Lyndon Johnson signed.
Joining me now is Pastor Darrell Scott. He's the CEO of the National Diversity Coalition. Thank you for being here, Pastor. Pastor, I want to talk about criminal justice reform. There's a lot of chatter about it right now, specifically when it comes to the First Step Act. So this bill passed through the House not too long ago, and right now there's calls on the Senate to move this forward. You have definitely been putting some pressure on Mitch McConnell. In fact, you want to sit down with him to talk to him about it, right?
Absolutely. I put in a call to his office. I've talked with his chief of staff, and they're supposedly sending it forward to scheduling, but we don't have a lot of time. In fact, I also got a response back from Senator Tom Cotton's chief of staff today, and I think I will have a conversation with him this afternoon. But we have to move this thing forward. It's been taking long enough. We've been working on this for well over a year now. And we've been dotting the I's, crossing the T's, going back and forth, tinkering it, tweaking it, whatever. And it's cleared Congress. It's time for it to pass through the Senate and go into law.
Well, and this passed with bipartisan support through the House. Is there a reason why our majority leader wouldn't want to even bring this up for a vote?
Well, I'm trying to find his motivation without jumping to conclusions from the bits and pieces that I've heard. There's a fear there that they have, and I think it's a fear based upon erroneous perceptions that all of a sudden the prison doors are going to fling open and all these ex-felons are going to go running out with knives and guns in their hand to just terrorize American citizens. That's not going to happen. It's not going to be a mass release. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis. And, you know, I'm hoping that there is no traces or hints of racism involved in their decision to slow walk this First Step Act, because, you know, part of the motivation for this First Step Act, and it's something that I advocated for very vehemently, was that the 1994 Clinton crime bill disproportionately incarcerated African American men. And so this First Step Act endeavors to address that and right those wrongs and correct those errors that were contained in that bill. And, you know, I think the perception might be that there's going to be a bunch of black criminals out on the streets. And I hope that's not their perception. But based upon their activity, it seems that might be back behind. Some of that might be underlined. I'm hoping it's not the case.
Yeah, Pastor Scott, I don't think that that's the case. I know that there are some conservatives that will say, well, you know, look at the crime statistics from the 90s. Crime has gone down significantly since then. And so maybe that's probably maybe part of the reason what they're looking at and why they're maybe not enthusiastic about that bill, because as you said, maybe there's fear that people will be let loose on the street that maybe shouldn't be let loose on the street so soon. But there's also some criticism from other groups, which is rather unusual, like the NAACP. And of course, there are some liberals in the House that had voted against it. So what would their reason be for opposing this bill?
I believe those are political reasons. The NAACP does not want President Trump to get credit for something President Obama should have done. They've painted this picture of President Trump as being anti-black, as being a racist, anti-minority. And so once again, this bill, this First Step Act, will address some inequities in the Clinton crime bill. The NAACP was a huge supporter of the Clinton administration, of Bill and Hillary Clinton. And so they don't want Trump to have any type of success that could reflect positively upon their base being African Americans. And they don't want African Americans to view President Trump in any light other than that of being a racist. And this, once again, dashes that narrative to pieces.
When it comes to the First Step Act, explain to me what specifically this does and how this is helpful and what you're saying, especially for the minority community.
Well, you know, once again, if African Americans were disproportionately incarcerated, then they make up a huge segment of the prison population that will be affected by this. Now, we're talking about reducing the recidivism rate. The aim of this First Step Act is not only to release people from prison, but to, as the Bible says, cause them to be transformed by the renewing of their mind so that they will not find themselves in that cycle of returning to prison over and over and over again. Release, return, release, return. Let me tell you something. I came up in the streets. I still have a lot of contact with the streets. I know people that, friends that I have, they began going to the penitentiary when we were literally in elementary school. They started going to the detention homes. They turned 18. They would go to the penitentiary. They would go in for 3 years, get out for a year, do 5 more years, get out for 2 years, do 6 more years. And it's simply because when they came home, they had nothing to return to. Because of the blight that was on their record as being felons, they couldn't get jobs. They were denied opportunities. And as a result, they felt they had no other recourse than to return to a life of crime. This First Step Act seeks to alleviate that that problem, seems to remedy that problem, provide them with skills training, and opportunities for gainful employment when they are released from jail, so that they will not feel that they have to return to a life of crime.
And when it comes to these programs specifically, what type of programs are we talking about, and how much is that going to cost taxpayers? Do we know?
Well, a lot of it is not going to cost the taxpayers anything, simply because, I'll give you an example. With our Urban Revitalization Coalition, we're spearheading this Urban Revitalization Initiative. A huge part of that, and it's going to be a public-private partnership. Most of the funds generated to make this program a success are coming from the private sector. Part of that is going to include education and vocational training and landing places for ex-felons. And so it's going to be funded by the private sector. It's not going to cost the taxpayers a huge chunk of money. It will cost the taxpayers less money to provide vocational and educational training than it does to house and incarcerate some of these felons. Let me tell you something. A lot of people are in jail. I'll give you an example. I have a family member that over 20 years ago, they were arrested. They had no prior convictions. They were pulled over for a broken taillight, and there was an empty crack pipe found in the car under the seat, and they wound up doing 2 years. It was a female. She had a 2-week-old daughter. The judge didn't care. She did 2 years in the penitentiary for an empty crack pipe. She came back out of jail, never been in any trouble since, but couldn't get a good job because she had a felony on her record, and it radically altered the course of her life for something that she should not have been incarcerated for. So those are the type of things that we're trying to remedy to prevent those things from happening again.
Yeah, we definitely have heard some stories where it seems like people were serving extremely long sentences for very, if you will, minor things when it comes to, marijuana and all of these other things. And the Trump administration has highlighted that, and actually President Trump has, highlighted some of these specific cases, and we've heard from these, now released prisoners. But I want to talk about some of the issues that Senator Tom Cotton has with this bill. Specifically, he's worried about, people earning credit, early release credit from just like watching TV and playing baseball. So what's your response to that?
It's not that simple. He's taking it to the extreme. You can't be someone that has been a problem prisoner, and they tell that problem prisoner, go in there and watch some television, and we'll give you some early release credit. It's not that simple. He's taking it to drastic measures. Once again, there's not going to be mass release, that all of a sudden the prison doors open and everybody walks out. These will be people that have demonstrated that they are ready for early release. There will be a review process involved. These are people, once again, they've demonstrated that they're ready for early release, and they've met whatever the criteria is. I think he's being a little extreme with that, just saying you can go watch some TV and get out of jail early. Yeah,
which touches on his second point, which is that he contends that the bill will allow dangerous criminals to win an early release. So not just regular criminals, dangerous criminals. So is there a part in this bill that separates between the nonviolent and violent offenders?
To be honest, when I look at what he was complaining about, a number of the things he was complaining about were endemic to the African-American community. He was talking about drug robberies and different things like that, and carjackings and different things like that. And so what is he saying? That we can that we have to treat these people differently. Well, let me say it this way. the disproportionate number of the people, the type of crimes that he's talking about, are usually those committed by minorities. And so, we're trying to be balanced and fair. But once again, you can't presume crime. I'll give you an example. We have these people that are very forceful in their defense of those that are coming in from across the border, that are trying to get into our country. And they'll say, well, you can't presume that when they come over here, they're going to do thus and so. Well, you can't presume that when a person gets out of jail, they're automatically going to go rob somebody or shoot somebody or kill somebody. Once again, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. These are people that are going to be subject to review. And, pending the review and after successfully interviewing, we'll see whether they're released or not.
Yeah, I know that the First Step Act has support from law enforcement, but of course there are some that work in law enforcement that still criticize the bill, and they do worry about recidivism, and they look at statistics, and statistics sometimes will show, who's more likely to commit a crime, and that's just based off of years of information. So what do you say to that?
Let me say this. The recidivism numbers are a little bit skewed. A lot of the people that, and I know a number of people that can fall into this category, a number of people who have returned to the penitentiary, they didn't necessarily recommit a crime. They had technical violations of their parole or their probation. Now, on the record, it would appear as if they committed another crime and they were returned to the penitentiary, but in actuality, they had probation violations or they had technical violations of their parole. I have a family member of mine. He did some time in the penitentiary, did a lot of time. He got out, got a good job. In fact, he was going to vocational school to get a career, and he had a job, and he was keeping his nose clean. Now, he was in one of the worst parts of town one night because he has a child there. And he was going there, and the police pulled him over, supposedly for speeding. Now, first of all, they don't pull you over for speeding in the hood, in the projects, on a Friday night. He was pulled over. When they searched his car, there was a gun in the car. He got sent back to the penitentiary. Now, in his mind, I didn't commit a crime. In the police mind, he had a parole violation. However, I will say this. Anyone that knows this area that he was in that night, if you go in that area and you don't have a gun, you're putting your life at stake. So in his mind, and talking to him, he says, man, I didn't even do anything. Yes, it was a gun in the car, but I didn't do anything. He went back to jail, did another year and a half. And so on paper, he committed another crime. In actuality, he had a probation violation. There was a gun in the car. The gun was not in the commission of a crime. It was actually in that car for self-defense. And once again, if you knew that area he was driving in, you go down in that area on a Friday night without a gun, you stupid.
Yeah. So
a number of cases like that, people that have got caught with some marijuana and went back to jail. People that were out and broke a curfew went back to jail. People that violated house arrest and went back to jail. On paper, they recommitted a crime. They're part of the return rate. But in actuality, no, it was a probation violation. It wasn't a recommission of a crime.
Yeah, definitely. We hear a lot of these stories. And of course, it goes the other way as well. So what's your message, your final message to McConnell or any of the senators that are skeptical about this bill? I mean, if you could sit down with Cotton and McConnell right now, what would you say to them?
Bring it to a vote. You'll be glad you did. This is a watershed moment in American history. This bill can be potentially as impactful as the Civil Rights Bill that Lyndon Johnson signed. You have to bring it to a vote. We are a republic, a democratic republic. We bring things to a vote. If the majority votes in favor of this bill, we shouldn't have one or two people with the power to stop something that the majority wants. And so they bring it to bear, and I promise you, it won't be the nightmare, or it won't fulfill whatever fears you have of this being harmful to the American public. I think it can be more beneficial to American society than it can be detrimental. It can restore families. It can put homes back together, families back together. It can do a lot of good.
And Pastor Scott, I know that you're a huge supporter of President Trump. There are some Trump supporters that are wondering why there's such a big effort on prison reform and why the wall still hasn't been built yet.
Listen, the wall needs money to be built. Give us the money. Tell Congress to give us the money and we'll build the wall. I mean, you want the president to build it out of his pocket. I mean, he has enough, his pockets are deep enough to do it. But once again, the money to build the wall, it's a two-edged sword. They say, why didn't you build the wall? But you won't allocate the money for the wall to be built. And so we have to become creative about it. But we know he wants to build the wall. We need that wall. And that caravan is demonstrating the fact that we need that wall.